Now, Penn State may have just gotten Koby Howard to commit, but the class of 2025 is not finished.
You are Locked On Nittany Lions, your daily podcast on the Penn State Nittany Lions. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Koby Howard commits, but I think there's still work to be done in the class of 2025. Plus, Penn State gets other commits for 2026 and even 2027. This is Locked On Nittany Lions. I'm your host, Zach Seyko, and thanks so much for making us your first listen and watch. Every single day, we are free and available wherever you get your podcasts, including YouTube. Brian Smith is back, the recruiting expert for the Locked On Podcast Network. And since this is a recruiting episode, let's talk about the leaders in job recruiting. LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. Let me know down in the comments who you think Penn State should still go after and recruit for 2025, what you think about this class in general, now that Koby Howard is a part of it. So we'll begin with that. Is Penn State's class finished? Is it complete? Who else can they add? Should they try to add here? And Brian, realistically, as far as uncommitted options go, I think Penn State's pretty limited here. Wide receiver, I still think they need to go get a fourth player. Jerome Miles, who's out of the state of Utah. We talked about him a lot. He's somebody that could factor into this conversation. But beginning with wide receiver, that's really about the only realistic option that they have, unless they try to flip somebody like Alex Cyrus or a Taz Williams.
Yeah, receiver, you could get somebody later in the year that you've scouted that you think's made a jump from their junior to senior year. If you're still calling those kids or texting with the ones you just mentioned, Cyrus, that's fine. But I am wholeheartedly in agreement with you. At this point, it's probably not going to happen, but it's free to spend Penn State's money while you use the company cell phone to communicate with them. It's not going to hurt. So I don't know if they'll get another receiver. I still think it's just as good a chance that they'll just get a better player in the portal. But it's not like this class is a disaster at receiver. They got a player or two. They got Koby, et cetera. We'll talk about. Now they have to be picky. Don't just take a guy to take a guy. I know that the scholarship numbers are changing allegedly. Need to find out for sure. Need to see that legislation go through, but they need to look at this from a very balanced class each year kind of situation, and don't overstep your bounds by taking one kid that just isn't going to play at Penn State's level.
And Penn State has 23 commitments. So this is a solid class. It's going to be in that 15 to 20 range unless they can flip some players. Yeah. So there's Jerome Miles. I want to name Malachi Goodman, who should probably pick up at least a little bit of steam or some more attention here. His recruitment's been rather quiet. You and I have mentioned him in passing just because there really isn't as much news about him, where he's taking visits, who he's promoting. Auburn is in the thick of this. You cover Auburn very closely, in addition to Florida State, Florida, etc. USC is also factored in there as well. And I think Penn State's offensive line recruiting for 2025 is okay. Malachi Goodman would take this from an okay to a really, really good, because he can play tackle, he can play guard, and there's a reason that USC and Auburn are recruiting a kid from New Jersey.
Yeah, he's a very, very good player. I think he can play guard or tackle. Power guy, over 300 pounds. That's in Penn State's wheelhouse, though, being a Jersey player. I know Auburn is making a push for him still. I heard about that recently. I think it was last week. So who knows when his decision will be made. But you got to go after. You can't lose all these kids locally to other schools, especially these SEC schools, over and over again. That'll hinder you long term. Penn State needs to win a few of these big O-line battles.
Auburn's certainly on a recruiting heater, so you know better than I would. Do you feel like they would be considered the favorite here, just kind of objectively, for Malachi Goodman?
I don't know. Like, he doesn't talk to anybody. I don't know if anybody knows. I'm not sure Auburn's staff knows. I just know that they're after him. That doesn't mean a lot. Mm-hmm. I got the information that I did from one of the recruits that is in the conversation about that stuff, but who knows? At this point, he might just be waiting it out and let the season play out and go that route, because he's had plenty of chances to commit. He's taken some visits.
Penn State still needs, I think, a defensive end, a linebacker, one or the other, maybe both here. And they're going to have to flip a player if they want to get that ideal. Like you said, you don't want to just add a prospect just to add a prospect,
Correct.
just to fill a scholarship number. You want to be able to land an impact player. And Zahir Mathis obviously fits that bill. Committed to Ohio State. He's been committed there for a long time. But Brian, he has visited not once, but twice for the Lash Bash and then a separate official visit. He's teammates with Penn State commit Jabri Wallace-Coleman, who's a running back, and Wallace-Coleman has said outright that, yeah, I am actively recruiting Zahir Mathis to flip away from the Buckeyes to the Nittany Lions.
There you go.
I actually like the chances of Penn State to eventually flip a Zahir Mathis. He has a really good relationship. Like all the boxes are being checked. He's in the state of Pennsylvania. Penn State has not given up recruiting him. It's not like they backed off. They continue to push and push and push. He has a really good relationship with Deion Barnes. I kind of have gotten the sense that Ohio State is still actively recruiting him, but maybe not as strongly as they once were, so which has allowed Penn State to gain some ground. And then you have, again, a teammate proactively trying to recruit you to join Penn State's class.
All those things make you think they're going to be in it until signing day at the very least. But at the end of the day, you just can't lose that kid. And then you got to take into account where he's committed. We've talked about this before, Zach. Can't lose arguably the best player in the state to Ohio State. That's what's gotten Penn State in part of this problem. They've lost a lot of PA kids to Ohio State in the last 20 years, a bunch. And this is probably the best pass rusher on the East Coast. He's certainly in the conversation. And Penn State's pretty good at that anyway. It's not like they're going to have a hard time selling it. So I'm curious to see what he does. But if I had to guess, whatever the decision is will be down the road. He's probably going to want to see Penn State play this year, got a new coordinator, et cetera. And if that's the case, I don't blame him. Yeah. I think that's pretty smart money to do that.
And because of the move that Max Granville made, reclassifying from 2025 to 2024, it opens up a spot for another defensive end to join the class of 2025. It allows, I'd say just a defender in general, because Brian, as we've already established, that Penn State is just recruiting athletes that can play anywhere in the front seven. So Jaden Woods is somebody that has played defensive end, but is now moving back and playing a little bit of linebacker here over the summer to potentially change positions, but he can do both. He can do both. LaVar Arrington II can do both. Max Granville can do both, even though he's being right now. He's practicing as a defensive end. He could do both if you really needed him to move back to linebacker. Max Granville reclassifies, joins the team presently in 2024. We talked about Zahir Mathis joining this group. Another potential flip is Cam Smith, linebacker, top 10 prospect in the state of Pennsylvania, committed to Duke, and Manny Diaz, but he was also on campus for the Lash Bash. So similar reasoning that I have here with Zahir Mathis, I think the same standard absolutely applies to Cam Smith as well.
Local kid goes to the right school. We probably need one more backer. Why not? I'm not really trying to be mean here, but you can't lose kids to Duke. I understand the relationship part, but this is not basketball. This is football. Mm-hmm. So if you lose and the kid just didn't want to play at your institution, and that's unfortunate, but like you can't lose kids to Duke. I don't know how else to say it. I'm curious if they don't get him, if they just go for a kid randomly around the country, because Penn State recruiting this year, their footprint is massive. Yeah. I don't know what the next option would be. Maybe somebody from Wyoming, maybe it's New Mexico. I don't know, but it's been everywhere but locally. So I'm curious what Smith does.
Like I said, they have players that can play both defensive end and linebacker. So only because of Max Granville vacating that spot in this class of 2025 does this allow for Penn State to really focus its attention more so on Zahir Mathis or Cam Smith. But that's really, those are the uncommitted players, and then those are the committed players that they could potentially try to flip. I think when names are thrown around, Andrew Olish, Jaden Blair, Kanoa Winston, Matt Zollers, I just don't think Penn State has a realistic shot of getting their attention. Sure, they might go for a game just to see everything, but I think that's just taking advantage of the opportunity to enjoy your Saturday. I don't think that Penn State is going to flip one of the top quarterbacks in the class. Winston, Olish, as great as they would have been for Penn State to add them to this class, they're committed to Michigan. And I know some sanctions or whatever, there's the rumored reports that the NCAA is going to drop the hammer here. I don't think that's going to change all that much and scare the likes of Winston and Olish away, just to kind of put that out there. So don't anticipate that Penn State's going to get a flip to the likes of a Zollers, a Jaden Blair from Notre Dame, or any of those Michigan commits that I named. Michael Carroll as well. You just told me that Michael Carroll was third on Penn State's list. So any of those names, I just kind of want to put that to rest, that don't get your hopes up too much for this group of players.
Yeah, it's interesting. Like the Carroll, he just wanted to play in the SEC. I talked to him about that, and he really liked the strength coach at Alabama. That put them over the top.
Him.
You know, good for him. Nice kid, by the way. But every recruitment has been very odd. It just seems like this year. Like I thought for sure Penn State would get Carroll. That's a kid. You know, early on he said they were pretty high on his list, but kids just look at things so much broader now. It really causes me pause to make predictions, and I used to make a ton of them. Man, it has gotten really, really hard. Penn State, outside of Oregon, is about the hardest school to figure out. It really is. In which that used to be the polar opposite. You pretty much knew about 6-7 states they were going to recruit, and that was it. Koby Howard situation, and a bunch of these other kids that we're going to talk about, they even dragged out a little bit differently. So it's been wild.
Well, it took a little bit of a longer time for Koby Howard to commit, and then Penn State got another commitment in 2026 and the first in 2027. Let's talk about Koby Howard's commitment and his potential as a Penn State wide receiver coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. And today's show is brought to you by Gametime. You can download the Gametime app because buying tickets to your favorite events should not be stressful. It's still summertime, and it's a great time to go to Major League Baseball games. When I'm buying baseball tickets, I use the Gametime app myself, and that's because Gametime is the authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets to these games faster and easier. And get this, prices on the Gametime app actually go down as it gets closer to first pitch. You get last minute deals with the Gametime app. You can save up to 60% off buying last minute tickets for sports, concerts, comedy, theater, and so much more. There's also exclusive in-app deals, flash deals, and zone deals where you can save even more off of select seats ahead of a game or an event. There's all-in pricing, so there's no surprise fees. You know exactly what your total is going to be upfront. And probably the best feature, if you're like me and you want to know exactly where you're going to be sitting and what that point of view is, you get a seat view, a panoramic view of your seat before you buy your tickets. So take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Gametime. Download the Gametime app, create an account, and use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create that account, use promo code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Download Gametime today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. Penn State finally gets its third wide receiver commit. There's an argument to be made that they still need a fourth, and if everything goes well, maybe a fifth, but that's way down the line. Let's talk about the one that's presently committed, and Koby Howard, out of the state of Florida, chooses Penn State over the likes of Ole Miss, Florida State. So Koby Howard, it seems like, has always been 100% Penn State. That this was always going to be his landing spot. Brian, you and I were the one of the first two to discuss the potential of Koby Howard ultimately committing to Penn State, and that goes for the fact that you have intel, you have boots on the ground, you're very familiar with his coaching staff, and have had prior relationships. You know you've talked to Koby Howard before, and just know how he operates. And we had the first idea that he was going to be a Penn State wide receiver. It was just going to take some time. What was the hesitation here? Why did this take so long, even though we had almost all but 100% confidence that Howard was going to end up in Happy Valley?
I'm not sure exactly. I know Florida was the leader for a little while, and that was way back. But once Penn State made a push, they were pretty secure up there. Florida faded. Florida State came into the picture, and he's originally from Pensacola, so that's always a school that's kind of been near and dear to his heart. But his recruitment was wild, but Penn State was always in the mix among those schools that were still coming at him. Ole Miss and different schools recruited him. I never got the straight answer on why it took so long, though. I don't know if he was waiting on somebody so to have his announcement, everybody there. I'll have to find out from him, but I never did find out the full intel.
Yeah, sometimes that has to do with scheduling. Most of these happen at public
Yep,
places, their high school, the gymnasium, and that takes some planning at the end of the day. You can't just willy-nilly
that's
pick
right.
if you're going to host it at a public venue to announce your commitment. So I think that's an interesting point about the scheduling and timing of it all. How there's the conversation that Howard wasn't Penn State's first choice, that they went down their big board and ultimately settled for him. That's just, I think that's some of the, different football commentators. I think that's also fans that might be disgruntled that they did miss on Alex Cyrus and they did miss on Taz Williams. And those were recruits that were above Howard on Penn State's big board. But I think Howard offers a lot in terms of talent. He was recruited by Florida. He was recruited by Florida State, Ole Miss. Those are SEC and whatever Florida State does at the end of the day with its conference realignment. But he was being recruited by SEC schools. He's a consensus 4-star. Brian, talk about the talent of Koby Howard, because again, you know his coaches, you know Koby, you've seen him play. What are his best attributes that make him a Big Ten wide receiver?
The two things that stand out to me are his first step get off and his very competitive nature in big time moments. There was a game last year where his team was playing terrible, and I'm being kind. And the quarterback got outside the pocket, was about to be tackled. He kind of flips the ball to Koby, and he just makes a bunch of guys miss and scores, and they win the game. They did everything possibly wrong, and he scored. So, and that was the game winner. He just comes up with stuff like that. And he came back off injury the year before. I saw him at a 7-on event. One of the first plays of the game, they threw a bomb and it was underthrown. He took the ball away from a kid. He makes the it plays that you can't measure with speed, height, stuff like that. And he's always been ultra competitive. I've known him since he was a freshman in high school. I knew after watching 3 reps, I'm like, okay, that's a Division I player. There were guys on the field that were, one was going to Florida State, et cetera, and he was already better. So I'm like, okay, I know he can run. I know he can catch. Now it's just about development. And he's taking it seriously, and he's at Chaminade Madonna now. Georgia's receiver coach is really good. They got a ton of guys. It's a very competitive environment. That's top 5 program nationally. I think he's going to be an excellent addition because he can play slot or he can play outside. And you're going to get a player that has the will and the gut that you would look for, like an old school Joe Paterno kind of player you would want. The attributes, though, in those key moments really do stand out. He just makes plays you can't explain.
How's he doing since the injury? And I know that he's had a good high school career, but how close do you think he is to being back to that full 100, 110% in terms of explosiveness? Because the way it's been described is a very nasty leg injury. So I imagine along the lines of a broken bone or something like that. So how do you think he's handled that adversity along with the physical recovery? Because there's the mental battle as well with that.
The mental party's over. He was over that quicker than he probably should have been.
Okay.
But he's a Florida kid, so that doesn't completely shock me. The injury was horrific. I was one of the few people that saw it. One of my friends got the video, and I was like, holy moly. It was a really bad break. And for him to come back as quick as he did and to be playing full speed was amazing. But at the same time, I don't know if that's changed his speed. He's gotten older, bigger, faster, stronger. Okay. I don't think that really matters that much. He's a powerful kid for his size, 180 pounds or so, 5'11", 5'11 and a half. But again, it's the gut and all that in the way his psyche is, I don't think that's going to matter much to him. And it doesn't look any different to me when I saw him this spring. So, and again, he's at Chaminade. Chaminade wouldn't have taken him if he wasn't ready to go. They've got 4 or 5 guys still going to college, even after losing 2 major Power 5 receivers. So they're not hurting for talent there at Chaminade.
Penn State has 3 consensus 4-star wide receivers to go. So there's Howard now, most recently committed, Jeff Exner, and Lyric Samuel. As far as the most potential out of all of them, I think Lex Cyrus, just being 6'4" and the way he glides, I would say his weight is a little undersized, but being listed around 170, 180, but that's part of it. Why he's able to run so fast is he doesn't have as much weight to him. But I think Penn State will change that. I think they'll get him to add maybe 20 or 30 pounds if it helps him, as long as it helps him. But he's not going to stay at that 180. Jeff Exner is your possession receiver, big body, knows how to use his size, listed at 6'2". He's on 220. So he's he's almost a tight end, if you will, as a wide receiver. And then Koby Howard. So I like that Penn State almost has a unique, like they don't all fit the same mold. Jeff Exeter is your possession, strong receiver. Lyric Samuel can stretch the field, and Koby Howard's a really good route runner with the potential, if he continues to recover from this injury, with the potential to add some more speed, but kind of that all around. You have a short threat, an intermediate threat, and a deep threat at those 3 wide receivers.
That's a nice way to look at it. You want balance. You can't just take all boundary receivers, can't take all slot receivers. You need balance. Mm-hmm. Koby could play in the slot or outside. I think Weir probably will play the flanker spot, but he might play some in the slot too. He's pretty talented. Exeter, I think, is your boundary. He might play a little bit of flanker, but that's a kid that's strong enough. He should fit that role and play it pretty early. So it's good for Penn State. They got a balance, and they've got some good tight ends on the roster. It ought to be an offense that teams have to try to pick their poison.
So while wide receiver didn't exactly go according to plan this cycle, I still think I think fans and I think the coaching staff at the end of the day are going to be content with at least these 3. Again, if you can flip Alex Cyrus or a Taz Williams, just because those guys, those names, and I don't think they have a chance at a Quincy Porter, for example. Or if you happen to win the Jerome Miles sweepstakes, again, he's down to 10 schools. His recruitment has really, really heated up. And I mean, really. Not a lot of schools offered him because he was committed to Ole Miss, decommitted, and now he's down. He's narrowing it down to a top 10. So Penn State's in the mix. I don't like their chances just because of how many other big name schools, like Georgia, for example, is listed inside of his top 10. I just don't like the odds because there's so many other Power 4 schools that are chasing after Miles to add a quality top 10, according to 24/7, top 10 wide receiver in the nation, to see if they can get him in this class. Utah, Michigan are in the mix as well. So he's out of the state of Utah. So it'll be tough, but I think they got receivers. They didn't get just 1 or 2. They got 3 quality consensus 4 stars at the end of the day. So that's something to at least accept, even though it didn't go according to plan.
Yeah, I think they're okay. Again, unless you get the right guy, just take the guy in the portal. That's simple.
Now, still to come, Penn State's being very proactive with the 26 and 27 classes. We've already talked about and addressed how 2026 could be a top 5 class in the nation, and Penn State went out and got the face of the 2027 class. It's never too early. We'll discuss those 2 commits coming up next here on Locked On Nittany Lions. Wide receiver Lavar Keys commits to 2026, and Kemon Spell out of the state of Pennsylvania, McKeesport in particular, commits to the 2027 class. We'll begin with Keys since 2026 is in fact closer to 2027, but I like Kemon Spell a lot as a prospect, just to preface. But Lavar Keys, just how we talked about that Penn State is fitting. So they have, again, a short threat, an intermediate threat, a deep threat for its 2025 wide receivers. 2026 has they're going after speed. You can tell that Penn State has at least changed its objectives slightly for 2026 with Jasir Rogers and Lavar Keys at their core. They are going to be some of the fastest players on the team and definitely on the football field against any opponent. I'm talking, if you take both rosters, Penn State and whoever their opponent is, a Jasir Rogers and a Lavar Keys are going to be in the top 5 in terms of overall speed, whoever you face at the end of the day.
Yeah, that's an important factor. When you get that kind of speed on the field, it changes what offenses do, defenses do, everything else. Speed kills. So I'm going through the film of some of these underclassmen that Penn State's already gotten committed. That running back, like the freshman, like you can tell that's a little different. Mm-hmm. Getting kids like that wrapped up early, I was like, okay, this will work well for any school. I'm sure everybody's still going to recruit him. But I was very impressed with all the kids they've had commit here recently, the underclassmen. And maybe they just don't want to deal with the battles like they did this year, especially at receiver.
Yeah.
I mean, I don't blame them. They get the kid from DeMatha. That, of course, is a great historical program, basketball and football. Yes. Was nice, too. So good for Penn State. Putting in some effort early to get some kids knocked out, and their 26 class is definitely off and running.
Now, we've already discussed the fact that Jasir Rogers could end up being a top 15 or a top 10 wide receiver overall in the nation. I'm still eager to see what kind of potential Lavar Keys has. I believe that Jasir Rogers, yes, as fast as he is, can be an all-around wide receiver, and he's shown that. Penn State doesn't take his commitment if he doesn't show that at 7-on-7 camp. Same thing with Lavar Keys. Lavar Keys doesn't have a ranking by everyone. Now it's starting to catch up. I think he ultimately ends up as a 4-star. Again, Penn State wouldn't take these commitments this early if they didn't believe in them as wide receiver prospects. But Jasir Rogers, I think, does fit that responsibility of being able to be that all-around go-to number one wide receiver, even though he is 5'10", listed at 170. Lavar Keys, I think, is your speedster, deep threat over the top. You can stick him in the slot. He's just quick. He's speedy. Everything that kind of Penn State's been missing for the past few seasons, a quality speed wide receiver. Like you said, speed kills. They need
100%.
Somebody that's just quick and fast that can make plays.
That is part of today's era. You throw the ball out to the guy. It's a basic screen, and everybody in the stadium knows you're going to do it. But if one guy screws up his assignment on the angle he takes, it's a touchdown. That's why they will bore you to death with that play, because they know one misstep is an 80-yard touchdown. He has the ability to make guys miss, even if the blocking's not all that great. So that also helps. But the question I have with Penn State, now that they're off to obviously a really great start, truly, for the class of 26, can they go get a couple other guys, especially in state or New Jersey? They need to reestablish there. And they've already, like this class in particular, they're trying to finish up. It is one guy here, one guy there, Kansas, Texas, California. That'll be interesting, especially if they can get a few of those kind of guys to commit early. But Penn State's already transitioned really, really well. It's conservative to say that'll be a top 10 class at this point.
They already have the quarterback commit, top 10 in the nation at that position, top 10 running back in Messiah Mickens, a top 5 offensive lineman in Kevin Brown. Again, we've already addressed that the rest will take care of it himself. I encourage other people to go check out those reaction videos, those analysis videos, talking about Kevin Brown, talking about Troy Hune, where Penn State, those are phenomenal commitments this early in the cycle, because again, the rest will take care of itself. They will be able to go out there and recruit for this class of 2026. But I think that's an excellent point that you brought up about the wide receivers, Prime, is the fact that they're taking care of this now. Rather, yes. I don't think it's the fact that Penn State was just kicking the can down the road for 2025 and waiting, but they saw just how much, I guess, of a pain it has been to get in these recruiting battles for wide receivers.
That's right.
So why not take care of it early while everybody else is focused on other parts?
Especially, again, like DeMath is a school that Penn State's familiar with. Mm-hmm. The in-state kid, running back, like these aren't really hard. If they would have got 2 or 3 commits that we were talking about today, and one's from California, another one's from Seattle, and another one is from Houston, it'd be a little different. You got to take care of the home base. They've lost more than they would probably like locally, especially in Pennsylvania this year. I think that'll be a major priority over the next couple of seasons. So, yeah, I think Penn State's putting a lot of effort into knocking those kids out right now.
Let's finish up this show with 2027. I can't believe we're talking about the 2027 recruiting class, but this has a similar vibe to what Messiah Mickens did, being the first commit for the class of 2026. So you're in-state running back, the face of your class. And again, Penn State continues to put itself in the conversation of being running back university with Saquon Barkley, with Miles Sanders, Journey Brown. Noah Cain was trending that way until an injury. And then you have Nicholas Singleton, Katron Allen. And then just waiting in the wings, a Cam Wallace, a Quentin Martin, a Corey Smith, Messiah Mickens down in the future. And then there's Kemon Spell. Kemon Spell out of McKeesport in the state of Pennsylvania. Doesn't have a ranking because it's class of 2027. But Brian, the initial scouting report is that Spell could end up being a top 10 running back himself, maybe even a top 5 running back in the nation, maybe in the number 1 prospect in Pennsylvania when the 2027 rankings begin to come in their own.
Very elusive, got some pretty good vision, and already has pretty solid speed for a kid his age. I don't think there's going to be many guys that tackle him at the high school level in the state of Pennsylvania. His ability to stop and start is also not fun to try to handle in space. He gets past that first level, it's look out. And he might make 3 or 4 guys miss to get there and zig and zag, but he gets to the end zone. another year from now, I'm curious how much he's going to weigh. He's only about 5'9", 5'10", but he is put together. So he could be one of those 5'10", 210-pound guys in a couple of years.
Yeah, everything jumps off of the tape when it comes to Kemon Spell. He's officially listed at 5'10", 195 pounds. So that's really good size for someone that is a rising sophomore. Nicholas Singleton is somebody who's presently on the team, has talked about adding the weight and still being able to move effectively, efficiently. Kemon Spell could end up being 230. I don't know to go as far to say, because that's really difficult to project a 240-pound running back and still being able to possess that kind of speed. But I think Kemon Spell just continues to fit into the same category as Katron Allen, Nicholas Singleton, eventually Quentin Martin and Cam Wallace, Messiah Mickens, and now Spell. But that's why this is important. Penn State had Messiah Mickens early in the 2026 cycle, becoming the face of that class. Penn State does it again, goes and gets the anchor. Kemon Spell is now your anchor, and you can begin to have those conversations player to player, like, hey, come join me at Penn State. We're building something special here in 2027.
That's part of it. If you get early commitments, that's one thing, but are they elite? He'll be one of the more highly coveted running back recruits in that class. He stands out. You don't have to watch much film to figure it out. And players want to play with other really good players. Good for Penn State.
And it's also nice to see that Penn State wins a recruiting battle in the Pittsburgh area. So central, eastern, towards the Philadelphia area. No, this is a player out of the Pittsburgh area. And Pat Narduzzi and the Pitt Panthers lose another local battle to Penn State. That's going to do it for this edition of Locked On Nittany Lions. He is Brian Smith, the recruiting expert for the Locked On Podcast Network. All of his platforms and socials will be linked down in the description. I encourage each and every one of you to go check them out. Brian, thanks again for the time. As always, we are so close to kickoff for the regular season, but it is always great to chat about some Penn State football recruiting. Thank you as always.
Thank you, sir.
Again, thanks for checking out this episode of Locked On Nittany Lions. If you enjoyed this conversation, please leave a like, share your thoughts down in the comments section. And if you're not already, become an everyday or subscribe to Locked On Nittany Lions on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts for the latest analysis around your favorite Penn State sports teams. And make sure for your second listen to check out Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin. I've been a guest on the show many times, and I very much enjoy it, and I know you will too. Spencer is getting you ready for probably the most exciting college football season in recent memory with conference realignment, the expanded college football playoff. He's talking about NIL, the transfer portal, season previews for teams, and so much more. Again, that is Locked On College Football with Spencer McLaughlin, now available on YouTube and wherever you get your podcasts, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team each and every day.